Nonlinear time. Hello again, thank you for being here with me once more. I hope you are all very well. I am Mari Swaruu. Although on Earth time is seen as something unmovable and a constant, or almost, in my culture time is understood as a personal perception of oneself which is mirroring onto what we perceive to be our exterior reality, as we don't conceive of there being a real world outside of our own perception, and the interpretation each one of us gives to what apparently is outside of our bodies. This means that nothing external to an individual's consciousness actually exists, as it is all a creation of how the soul gives potential ether energy a meaning. All this is the basis of the concept that the only thing that actually exists is consciousness, one greater consciousness we can call Source, or the Source, and where all the rest of the existing sentient beings who are self-aware, are only more limited ideas in Source's greater mind. This is where time as a concept comes in, because you cannot be sentient, or even self-aware if we are not having a more or less sequential series of thoughts, even if those thoughts are in disorder and have no co-relationship between each one of them. They would still have an order of appearance in the mind of the subject, as in the next example using series of concepts. A monkey is eating an encyclopedia, cold running, bedrock breakfast vacuum cleaner. Those words isolated have no logical meaning, and little to no relationship with each other, yet they still have a sequence, as ideas do in the mind of the subject, and with a personal time frame. This personal timeframe is the individual's perception of time, in simplified terms. As each person is always subjected to reactions of all kinds, but mostly emotional, he or she is having to the stimulation, which is coming from what meaning it is giving to its outside world, which, as I said above, is nothing other than a mirror of the subject's, or each subject's self. Although ultimately there is no reality outside the consciousness of the subject, there is one from the point of view of each person's experience. Even though the external reality is only an illusion, the person's experience is very real, giving him or her the vivid experience of being immersed in a greater reality which is apparently not a product of the mind. When two or more people are having a very similar experience, as in perceiving reality apparently the same way, it will never be exactly the same, simply because of the different points of attention, therefore angle of view, besides the subtle and not so subtly changes in interpretation, value, each individual has. One of the most important ways two or more people develop a perception of reality which is very much the same, is with agreements of perception, where those individuals have a similar enough consciousness to be able to interpret the illusory external reality in a similar enough way. By having a similar enough consciousness I mean that they have similar parameters to give value to what is apparently outside of them, yet they will never be exactly the same. An example of those parameters is the agreement that defines the attributes of each external object, like those which define a lamppost and its uses, for example. It is here where having an agreement on the perception of how time passes is imperative to develop other agreements of perception, which will ultimately form the shared reality of individuals with similar mentalities, because time is the base perception from which all the others come from, as it is what defines the sequence of thoughts a subject is having, the relationship and space between them in the subject's mind, and ultimately the experience and emotions that individual and its soul are having. On any planet, such as Earth, among others, the basic timekeeping system, from where the entire perception of its inhabitants comes from, is obviously the planet's natural cycles of night and day, where a value of a unit of time is the duration of one of those planetary cycles, which will be the same for every one of its inhabitants, but only to a certain point, because even then the experience of each individual will depend more on what it is thinking and on what it is conscious of, and not only of planetary cycles of night and day, as the classic example that states that the duration of a minute depends on the side of the bathroom door you are at. Furthermore, on Earth, there is another much stronger timekeeping system, and that is the artificial agreement of having clocks and watches, hours, minutes, seconds and so on, which is considered to be like a metronome with which human society is kept in synchronicity, and with the very erroneous idea that time is a constant, therefore the same for everyone, especially because humans on Earth don't have any other reference points or examples of how time moves. Yet even outside Earth, souls incarnated in Lyrian bodies, that is humans, still hold a very similar perception of reality, which also means a very similar perception of time, similar enough to be able to adapt to one or another planet's cycles when traveling in space. Yet, each planetary system will have its own perception of the duration of time, which is the result of the average coming from its collective unconscious, and the differences may be very large or drastic. But when the soul disincarnates, when an individual dies, their soul loses the reality filter the body was giving him or her, and enters a much broader reality, the very large astral planes, where the vibration, the frequency of each soul, which is defined by its thoughts, is the one which manifests the again illusory reality the subject is in. This causes dissociation from all the timekeeping and time-synchronizing mechanisms of the world of the living, away from the perception of day and night as such, and away from clocks and watches. What each individual experiences in the astral, or in the afterlife, is a clearer, immediate mirror of the individual's self. Without the slow-moving agreements of the material world, it reflects more accurately each soul's frequency and vibration, and this is why countless people, experts, and so on claim that the astral is reality, and the world of the living is only a materialistic illusion based on the biological senses of a body. The astral is a very large range of reality spaces, where I am only using the term afterlife as basically the same as the astral, but only referring to it when arriving there after being incarnated in the material world in a biological body. When there are no common reference points to be used to synchronize the perception of time, individual souls, incarnated or not, will simply use the one which is closer to each one's perception and vibration. This means that when an individual dies and finds himself in the afterlife astral planes, the perception agreements of time break, therefore its perception of the speed of time changes drastically, as they are no longer synchronized with the ones of the material world. In the astral plane, synchronizing a perception such as time becomes very imprecise, as it lacks mechanisms such as night and day, hours and minutes to use as a reference, or only to a limited extent when those souls can still perceive some of what is going on in the world of the living. This is why so many ghosts have a repetitive habit of appearing in the same place and doing the same things, such as walking down a specific corridor, for example, where we may only perceive them as being repetitive, therefore trapped from our perception from the highly time-synchronized world of the living. Ultimately, there is one astral plane for each point of attention or soul, although there are perception agreements there too, as many entities and souls share the same spaces and experiences in a similar way as in the world of the living. But each soul in the astral will be manifesting its own perception of time based solely on its thoughts and ideas, which are its vibration. The linearity of time there can only be seen from the point of view of the sequence of ideas or of events each soul is having, and not from the point of view of an external synchronized collective. This is in these cases where the perception of time becomes not linear, except from the point of view of the soul experiencing it. But this can happen even while alive if there is enough dissociation from reality to cause the desynchronization, for example, while having a fever, or waking up entirely after a nap, in that state where you are still struggling to remember what day of the week you are living. This also happens when an individual time jumps in a starship, because their reality frame changes so drastically, that so does their perception of time. This is also why many times time jumper crews of a starship cannot be understood very well by those who did not time jump with them, creating a sensation of nonlinear chaos and incongruences in their stories. The only real meaning and linearity of time can only be understood by the subject who is experiencing it, without dates and clocks and watches, or only their own. The only real value of the duration of time, and time itself, is a very individual experience as it is linked to the consciousness of each soul, how it reasons and how it works. Time is not linear, as that only depends on the perception of each person. Thank you for watching my video, and for liking and subscribing. I appreciate it a lot. And I hope to see you here next time. Take care of yourselves. With much love, your friend, Mari Swaruu.